When I think of a film that is a cult classic, The Evil Dead always comes to mind. That original film was banned in multiple countries due to graphic depictions of violence, and I think the series as a whole is a Marmite one, where you either love the ridiculous over the top nature of it, or you hate it and you want to go and grab the nearest sick bag.
There it is.
In anticipation for this latest release, Evil Dead Rise, I watched the previous 4 films, and I have to say the first film is a tier above the rest in my opinion. I think the second film follows on from it very well. The third film is completely bonkers and leans a lot more into that fantasy element instead of horror, and then the remake in 2013 I thought was a pretty solid remake compared to others you see in Hollywood, and I think it did get a lot better towards the end of that film. But with this one, Evil Dead Rise, we're moving away from the cabin in the wood and instead changing the scenery completely by going to an LA apartment. And I think that was a good move because it's given this series a fresh coat of paint, and there's plenty of things within it as well which will resemble what you've seen before but in this new setting. The story this time round focuses on 2 estranged sisters as they have a reunion, an earthquake happens, a book is found, and flesh possessing demons arrive. The apartment most of the film takes place in is owned by one of the sisters called Ellie, and she lives there along with her 3 kids, Bridget, Danny and Cassie. The latter is played by young actress Nell Fisher, and during filming she was only 9 years old, and you might be thinking while watching the film, how is she coping seeing all this horrific imagery? Well, Lee Cronin, the director, said that it was all about making sure she knew it was make-believe, and that even included letting her play with fake blood.
Oh, so much blood! There's so much blood!
It's paint, Jim!
So much pain!
With that in mind, I probably should have told the lady next to me in the cinema that it's fake blood, because she just kept going on and on and on about the blood, and that she hated the gore and that she was feeling queasy about it. And I'm like, why are you in here? Why are you in an Evil Dead film if you hate gore? Like, why don't you go watch the Mario film? You have a much better time, I'm sure. But yeah, it does seem to be a common occurrence when seeing a horror film at the cinema that there is a reaction of some variety, whether it be that or people yelling out every single time a character goes into a dark room sort of thing. Of course, if you've got any stories to share, put them in the comments below. Back to Evil Dead Rise now. The film takes its time to get going, but once it does, you are strapped in for the ride, and as teased in the trailer, there are quite a few interesting surprises in store, and even some weapon choices as well, and the film just constantly moves. You know, you're never really staying still at any point. The acting throughout is to a pretty good standard, and I think for a few members of the cast, this film could be used as a springboard for their careers. Alyssa Sutherland in particular, like, she was decent when she was unpossessed, but when she goes full on Deadite mode, she is fantastic. With this being a horror film, a perfect question to ask is it scary? And I think, like that original film, it does have that claustrophobic feel to it, as you do feel trapped within this apartment block. I don't think it's on the same level as the wood in the first film, but it is in there, and that's the important thing. Having said all that though, I don't think there's that many scares in the film, so if you're not an Evil Dead fan, you may think this is quite a generic horror film, because it does reward having those references in mind when watching the film, in the same way as the Mario film. You know, if you don't know those games, you won't enjoy that movie as much, and I think the same applies here. This film is a bloody nightmare in terms of all the gore and how gross it is, but honestly I've not been against it going up a further level, because we've seen that in previous installments, and the same goes for the absurdity level as well, because I don't think this film really goes into that sort of territory so much, and I think maybe in the future films we'll see that, but it does keep it a bit safe. I mean, there are, you know, over the top things in the film, but it doesn't really have that same feel to it as we've seen in the previous versions, and it depends on what sort of side you want it to be on, because it's a fine line to walk. You do want it to be more horror than silliness, or do you want it to be a bit more silly and have that horror element in there too? So it really depends on your taste with that. In terms of horror cliches, there is a usual suspect here, and that is the characters doing idiotic things and making some completely odd decisions which will make you scratch your head. And there were some clear ideas they could follow through with, but they never do so. But to counter that, it was a welcome relief that there was about one jump scare in the whole film.
Yes! Yes! Oh God, yes!
All in all, this film brings a solid foundation for more Evil Dead films in the future. You know, they're great for studios as well, because they are generally low budget. On the film itself, it has that fresh but familiar feel to it, so I think fans will enjoy it, and I think it will also bring new fans on board as well. The use of the surroundings, like the peephole point of view scene, makes you think what sort of locations they can go into next. And even though I craved a bit more silliness and maybe them going into a bit more of the lore, I think they can expand on that going forward. But this film, is great on the big screen, but also one where I think, for sleepovers and for parties, it will work really well there too. And apart from the bookends of the film, which are neither here nor there, the rest of it is a well constructed movie, and one which I think for Evil Dead fans, they'll thoroughly enjoy. If I had to rank these films, I'd probably put this film at number 3 behind the first film and the second film, but let me know your thoughts on this one overall as well as where you would put it amongst the rest. And if you want to watch another groovy video, on screen right now is our review for The Pope's Exorcist.